This is what I'm made of. I will never ever let go. This is what I'm made of. No one can control me, 'cause this is what I'm made of. You can hate but never break me.
Persatuan Kebangsaan Autisme Malaysia atau lebih dikenali sebagai NASOM. Pada 3 Mac 1987, NASOM telah didaftarkan sebagai sebuah organisasi kebajikan yang berdaftar di bawah ROS. NASOM telah menetapkan objektif utama untuk menyediakan pelbagai perkhidmatan sokongan untuk membantu individu autisme, terutamanya kanak-kanak dan ahli keluarga terdekat. Pusat NASOM pertama telah dibuka di Titiwangsa pada tahun 1988 dengan jumlah murid kurang dari 20 orang. Sebagai pusat intervensi awal, NASOM menerima anak-anak seawal 3 tahun hingga 12 tahun sebagai pelajar. Pelbagai kemahiran seperti kemahiran mengurus diri, interaksi sosial dan komunikasi, pola akademik dan pengurusan tingkah laku diberikan sebagai persediaan sebelum mereka melangkah ke alam persekolahan. Malah, NASOM juga membantu mereka supaya lebih berdikari. Kini, NASOM memiliki 11 buah pusat intervensi awal hampir di seluruh Malaysia termasuk di Sabah. Anak-anak autisme yang meningkat dewasa mempunyai kesukaran untuk mendapat tempat dalam masyarakat. Namun, di pusat vokasional NASOM, mereka amatlah dialih-alihkan. Pada tahun 1999, di Kuchai Lama dan di Bengkel Daya Kelang, pusat vokasional pertama telah berjaya ditubuhkan. Dengan menyediakan modul kemahiran vokasional seperti pembuatan roti, penyediaan makanan dan lain-lain, mereka diajar untuk menguasai teknik kemahiran agar mampu berdikari atau bekerja di luar. Selain menyediakan program intervensi awal dan vokasional, NASOM juga mempunyai sebuah pusat terapi yang menyediakan perkhidmatan ujian saringan diagnosis, perkhidmatan terapi seperti terapi pemulihan cara kerja, terapi blok, terapi tingkah laku dan program intensif intervensi secara perseorangan dan program kreatif secara berkumpulan. Pada tahun 2005, pusat terapi NASOM mula ditubuhkan di Jalan Pahang sebelum berpindah ke Setia Alam pada tahun 2012. Pusat terapi di NASOM bukan sahaja menyediakan perkhidmatan ujian saringan dan juga program terapi, tetapi juga menyediakan perkhidmatan konsultasi bagi ibu bapa dan juga memberi ceramah, latihan serta bengkel untuk guru, ibu bapa dan orang awam. Sebagai sebuah NGO, NASOM bergantung sepenuhnya pada bayaran iuran pelajar dan sumbangan dari badan korporat dan orang awam. Setiap sumbangan RM5 layak menerima resi pengecualian cukai. Setiap sokongan serta bantuan anda akan membantu kami di NASOM untuk terus beroperasi di masa hadapan. Sebarang pertanyaan berkenaan autisme atau NASOM, anda boleh menghubungi kami seperti berikut.
Good afternoon, Ruth.
Good afternoon, Anne. Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Looking forward
Okay.
to sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for agreeing to be on our NASOM talk. And we also want to thank the producer for the show today, NASOM's very own chairman, Julian, who's in the background, ensuring that everything goes on well. And good afternoon to all our listeners, all our viewers on Facebook Live. And I think Ruth does not need much introduction. She has a law degree, and then also when she did her master's in UM, and her research was on autism, and that actually brought her closer to our NASOM Teluk Pelai, where she did her research and she collected all her data from there. And so she's been a part of NASOM since 2002. and she's always been, wanting to actually volunteer her services for us, and she's done a few talks for UITM, NARC, and here she is now going to be talking on the importance of parents understanding the complexity of autism. And Ruth will tell you all why autism. Ruth, it's all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Good afternoon, everyone. So today, our title is The Importance of Parents Understanding the Complexity of Autism. Now, before I look at the next slide, let's look at the word complexity. When you look at the word complexity, what comes to your mind? It means the intricacy of autism. What do you mean by the word intricacy of autism? Before we actually engage deeper into that word, let's look at the journey of autism. Now, if we actually look at the autism, how it actually came about, it went back as early as 1798. Now, when I show all this chronological awareness, I am going to emphasize on what is it that people in general, the specialists, whether be it psychiatrists, psychologists, analysts, scientists, what is it that they looked at? Now, the first one, if we look at the Victor Wild Boy of Aveyron, we would see they noticed he did not have language, followed by Eugene Brewer, who used the word autism for the first time. And then he went on to interpret, now please listen to this very carefully, that these individuals went their own way. And then followed by 1926, whereby we had high functioning autism. What do we actually mean by the word high functioning autism? We will see shortly later. My whole insight into autism started with Dr. Leo Kanner. Dr. Leo Kanner was actually analyzing 11 children whom he thought were schizophrenic. However, when he looked at them, he realized, now this is a very important point, he realized that they were not functional. When you use the word functional, what does it mean? It is in the afternoon today. So let me give you examples. You're not able to tell someone, I'm tired, I'm hungry, etc., etc. So he realized that something was amiss because they showed traits of echolalic, they were in their own world, words and phrases which I will explain much later. Consecutively in 1944, we had Asperger's. And when we look at Asperger's, Hans Asperger found these children, they had language, they were able to talk, but they showed what we call islets of ability. That means they were able to perhaps do maths, they were able to do science, they showed such great excellence in those areas. However, we are going to see later what is similar between the diagnosis done by Dr. Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. Consequently, we had Bettelheim Bruno. Now, this man came up with this theory that parents are the cause of autism. Now, this theory was thrown out, and this whole understanding of what autism is from his perspective was removed. Consequently, we had the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. This manual is used a lot by psychologists, in which they would refer if you want to actually do a diagnosis based on this word. Is it autism spectrum disorder? I will go into the word disorder shortly. But let's just look at what happened after that. Stella in the 1960s, right? And she said autism is a neurological disease. However, in 1964, Rimland Bernard said, no, it has a biological basis. And he quickly did in his research, he started identifying the genetic components in autism. However, in the 1970s, there was a decline in the psychogenic paradigm, and they sort of endorsed it during the 1977s that autism is highly heritable. In 1979, we had Wing and Gold, two scientists, who now put it into traits of impairment. Now, what do you mean by traits of impairment? Please remember that word, which I'm going to explain once I've looked at the second slide. DSM-3. Now, Professor Simon Baron Cohen said, in fact, even the word disorder was actually introduced because in America, if you wanted to claim under insurance, you had to make sure that whatever was diagnosed fell within the definition of disorder. He said he preferred the word condition because if you look at the deep meaning of the word condition, it means a state of being. So in DSM-3, there were changes. In DSM-3, all right, they said most of the cause symptoms focus on childhood characteristics. So that means they found when you refer to the DSM, they were looking at the characteristics. But there was failure or there was little attention given to how this condition might manifest later in life. So at the same time, we had Asperger's. And Asperger's, they showed, as mentioned earlier, islets of ability. That means they could be good in maths, astronomy, history, and geography. But then again, there was another thought provoking moment. What happens? They were significantly affected by their condition, and they did not have enough understanding of what they were going through. So we had the DSM-5 that came along. Now, DSM-5 in 2013, what happened is they took pervasive child integrative disorder, they took all the 5 disorders and they put it under one, which was now called autism spectrum disorder, which means now in order to actually identify between, as what was mentioned earlier, Kenner, now I will highlight what was Kenner. Kenner was at that point of time low functioning autism, echolalic, babbling, whirling around in circles, no eye contact, and Asperger, where children showed islets of ability and they were able to do all those areas which I mentioned. However, my beautiful audience, between Kenner and Asperger, there is a common denominator, which is social communication, social interaction, and now they put repetitive behavior. However, I want us to remember or know this. Social imagination was removed from DSM-5. Now, so now we have DSM-5, and when a child is taken to see a psychologist, all right, they would probably have a list. There are many lists. They would tick the list. Now, the issue now, which I've identified in red, is without looking at the possible causes. Sometimes a child may have gone through some illness, and due to that illness, the child is not able to perhaps speak. So the unfortunate thing is, all right, which was highlighted as being a researcher, without identifying and looking at the possible causes, the the whole diagnosis of autism, I use the model verb, may be given. So what is actually emphasized is, before the diagnosis of autism is given, it is very important, even though we have all this beautiful enshrined checklist, we have to ensure that the causes of what happens, I mean, a little bit of the child's history needs to be shared. All right, a new revelation. What has happened now? All this while, in my years of 15 over years as a researcher, as a lecturer, as a volunteer, as a person who is empowering parents, teachers, etc., when I start my lecture, I would introduce autism as a cognitive neurodevelopmental disorder. However, we are going to see on this slide what has changed. Let me analyze the word autism. It comes from the Greek word autos, which means self as opposed to the real world. In Mauryan language, taki watanaga, which means his or her own space. Now, in the DSM-5, they have put it in such a way now, we have level 1, which is high functioning autism, level 2, which could be Asperger's, and level 3, which is low functioning within canon. Why did I introduce Anthony Hopkins? He only found out that he was on the spectrum, that means as an Asperger, when he was 70 years old. And look at how he reflected his life. He said, "My whole life I have felt like an outsider." Now in 2020, they have come up with a new word, a new phrase, neurophysiological difference, intellectual living, free from social and emotional. And the key word is hyper focus. We are going to go deep into this word hyper focus. But before I explain the word hyper focus, I love to give examples, because examples, especially at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, makes us understand what is it, what do you really mean by this Asperger's. Now, if you look at Anthony Hopkins, he has a strange relationship with his daughter, Abigail Hopkins, and he mentioned these words. He can read, memorize lines, almost like a photographic memory. However, he said, these are his words, quote unquote. What is the big deal? We are not related by choice. We have family. We may move on, or we may need to move on. He didn't see the need to connect with his daughter, who is very, very petrified and overwhelmed and trying to come to terms that her father is not willing to accept her from her perspective. So this is where we are going to go into the brain. I'm going to take all of us into the brain. But before I do that, let's look at two different perspectives. Here you have a daughter who looks, why? Why isn't he trying to connect with me? We may have had our differences. he may have come from a dysfunctional family, etc., etc. But he does not want to connect. And from his perspective, he has these words which he shared openly, right? That as I mentioned earlier, which I will reiterate now, there's no necessity. We are here, we move on, and I have to move on with my life, and so forth and so on. All right, let's find out what is going on in our brain. My beautiful audience, if I take the definition of autism as it was before we came with the neurophysiological definition of autism, it is a cognitive neurodevelopmental disorder, which means the brain is involved. So, in my empowering of parents, of teachers, of anyone, the question is this: why do I emphasize on the brain? Within the short frame of time, I'm trying to cramp in by letting all of you know that the brain is involved. And if the brain is involved, what are we concerned about as parents? So, of course, there are many areas, but I am going to focus on the limbic system of the brain. First of all, let's get to know the brain. The brain is a tissue that is susceptible to change, right? So when you talk about being susceptible to change, we have, these are the thoughts that we must be clear. I apologize if it may appear a little technical, but the technicality you will see is very, very important. In my later slides, the whole revelation will bloom. Nature or nurture? Is it parents entering their world, or is it something that they are born with? And then we have our DNA, and we are told we have like 20,000 over genes or fewer, that and maybe only 10% are ever expressed. What do you mean by expressed? Let me give you an example. Let's say I'm interested in my child to get into the habit of reading. So I would introduce a book at a very young age where I still have control over that ability. So what they are trying to tell us is, as we consistently introduce the habit of reading, the child's brain gets activated and the genes get expressed, and the child develops the habit of reading. I'm just trying to simplify it. So, research and all the top researchers and scientists come up with this phrase: there is no such thing as developing a child independent of context. Therefore, very apt, very suitable for what autism goes through. Now, before we actually enter their world, the question is, are we entering their world with positive stress? I'm using the word, there are many kinds of stress, but I'm going to use the very common word, that is toxic stress. When you talk about toxic stress, we are talking about an excess of adrenaline and cortisol. And what happens when this gets into an excess mode of disturbing the child's mind? Please listen very carefully. By our intervention. Let me put it into simple perspective. The prefrontal cortex, all right? Please don't be worried about all these parts of the brain, but it is important to know. The prefrontal cortex, okay, so it's the air traffic control. The amygdala, where our emotions, and our hippocampus, where it's our learning and memory. But let me give you examples. A child, it's recess time. Okay, the bell rings, the child goes for recess. Now, the excitement is, I am going to buy some food. So the child, that's called your working memory, right? He is supposed to now line up. However, along the way, the child gets pushed by someone else. So now there's a trigger, and the amygdala, based on the child's autism level, all right, reacts. How does the child react? Is it a fight? Is it a flight? Is it a freeze? Is it extreme? Now, the next time the hippocampus comes into this level. So now, when the child, let's say, has bypassed that second stage of challenge, the child goes to pay. Now, when the child pays, the child has been taught that you have to give 10 ringgit, and if the food is 5, you get it back. Where does that get stored? It gets stored in the hippocampus. Beautiful audience. My question now is this: what do we do based on how we help the child determines how this, I use this acronym PA, the prefrontal cortex processes, or we say your working memory, controlled actually further by another technical area of the brain, your amygdala, the emotions, and the hippocampus. So, number one, do we use force? Do we hit the child? Do we shout at the child? Do we insist? Is it our expectations that are placed on the child? Let me show you the possibilities that can happen. Right. Children on the spectrum have a tendency to be hypersensitive. Now, the areas where hypersensitivity is normally observed is loud noises, bright lights. Okay, sometimes they feel there's a lot of anxiety. And let's say there are 2 or 3 people talking, and there's conversations going on, and there's too much of information. Now you know the information is going into the prefrontal cortex, or maybe the clickety clack of the computer, or the sound of a bird. All right, so there is something called sensory overload. Imagine, let's take the first type, DNA type of child, who may be a kenner, a child who is non-verbal. How will that child now tell you that, Mom, can you please switch off the fan? Can you switch off the radio? Can you da da da? The child is or may not be able to say any of this. So what happens? The child may have what we call, now we have English language, we have the scientific language, we have the scientific phrase, react. And how will the child react? We say the child will have a meltdown. The child may start banging the table, the child may get into a frenzy, the child may do all kinds of things. Now, before we come to the part what to do, let's look at the other challenge that the child may face. Please remember, the new 2020 way of viewing autism is hyper focus, which means they appear to be very single-minded, they are very fixated. If they are playing with something, they would spend hours and hours playing with it, and this is how they use the word, they are incapable of responding to the environment. Now, the mental traits of hyperfocus. Let me give you an example after I have read this. They are trapped in thoughts. Their mind is always busy. They have a tendency to overthink, passionately pursuing interests, often to extremes. Self-awareness but no social awareness. Interruptions trigger agitation, confusion, anxiety, cannot multitask. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say it is a simple question, and this is a classroom, and you would ask, okay, is A times B AB? All right, or is it A times B? Does it still be A times B? And this child maybe within Asperger's who loves mathematics may suddenly decide to go into a whole narration of how maths came about and what is the A and what is the B, etc. One scenario. Second scenario. This is a true life story. The teacher is actually explaining on the board, right? And the teacher was not able to balance the account. All of a sudden, this child who is high functioning or Asperger's stood up in front of everyone, went straight to the board and corrected and did the balancing and went back and sat down. In both these scenarios, let's go back to what I mentioned earlier, social communication, social cues. The teacher was in a huff and a puff. The teacher did not understand what the child meant, what the child was doing, because in these children, the theory of mind, their ability to read that that was wrong is not there. In the first scenario, you would get, all right, the classmates getting irritated as he went into this long, depthful explanation of mathematics when he should have just said A times B is AB. So what happens now is when they tell us they have the encyclopedic knowledge, what is going on? It is in the brain. Now, when we say it is in the brain, what must we as parents know? We as teachers know. What is it that the environment must know? This is the big question that I'm going to ask later. Let's look at the emotional trait. Unable to feel emotion, process emotions intellectually, generalize physiological responses instead of emotions, anxiety, can be angry without knowing so, cannot nurture self psychologically, shrinks from emotional displays by others, unable to defend against emotional attacks. Let me give you an example. Parent A comes back from work. So, parent is tired, exhausted. It has been a long day. However, this child who probably is within, all right, level 3, if we follow DSM-5, or as I like to refer it to, is used to the routine of the father taking the child for a drive around the neighborhood. So, what does this child do? The child runs to the father, takes his car keys, and starts rocking up and down, and maybe jumping, which is a signal, in short, because the child is non-verbal. I want to go for a car drive. Now, the parent who has, okay, let me just give you real life scenarios. Parents who have sent to 101 therapies, right? And looks at this situation with such, maybe with such irritation or anger, and would feel, why don't you understand? Papa is tired. Papa is tired. Papa has finished work, and he would go on and on and on. And the child, now that we have looked at the brain, does not understand this emotion. So, this is where the social communication is so deep. So, what may happen? The child may have a meltdown because the child will persist and insist. The parent who may not understand that he has to fulfill the child's wish will get into a huff and a puff. And before you know it, when both of them merge, it could be, there could be force, there could be anger in the form of verbal or maybe physical. The child will have a meltdown, And what will his cerebrum, what will his limbic system, what will the child's hippocampus register if this scenario is repeated? He will associate the pain. He may associate the pain that he felt. So here now we have this whole mess. So now the parent who does not understand what the child is going through will either call the therapy, go and see a psychiatrist, medication like risperidone or whatever medication that is out there, which I may not know, will be administered. Social deficits. All right. Lacks innate the need to desire, see the word, the desire to socialize. Unaware, obvious of feelings, needs, and interests of others. Not conscious how they are perceived by others. Not aware of socially appropriate responses. All right? Unable to take hints. Okay, now, in this scenario, many settings are actually coming to my mind. But if we want to have a social deficit, let's take a classroom, right? So what happens is, let's say child A sits beside child B, and it so happened that child B today did not bring the pencil. And this child who has an extra pencil may find it a trigger, it may even be a trigger if suddenly that pencil is taken from him. So you see, the social deficits is very, very deep. I'm just giving you a classroom example. But what about when the child is outside in a supermarket? I had some of the sharings, which I can actually uh, share now. It's like when the child was going up the escalator and the child was oblivious that he must actually give way to the next person. He hits the person, all right, and he moves on. What can happen from that? That person who was hit may get angry with the parent. The parent who is already so unequipped may then engage in an unnecessary feud over that small incident. Let me give you my example. As I am lecturing in this class, all right, and what happens all of a sudden, this young 24-year-old boy decides to, is within the Asperger's, come up with poems from Shakespeare. He had these beautiful poems. So he suddenly put up his hand and he said, Madam Ruth, I have a poem for you from Shakespeare. I knew that he was on the spectrum. So what I did, I was teaching adult learners. I waited for him to go to the toilet and I shared with them. So when he came back, I said, all right, 5 minutes before the class is over, you can share your poems in my class. So my class went on fine. However, when the other lausers, when the other teachers came in Malaysian environment of teaching, suddenly the teacher said, shh, do not disturb. That's all. This boy sent me in super duper English, damning the teachers, and it did not end there. He tried to commit suicide. Now, my question is this, or your question is this. Here you have an individual. He is so able, he can do maths, he can do science, he can do Shakespeare poems, he can do everything. But that small incident was enough to be a tsunami to send him to spiral his thinking into the possibility of taking his own life. So we must look, when we talk about social deficits, it is very deep. On the surface, especially in Asian culture, we emphasize a lot on academic. All right, we will find out shortly. In conversation, right? It says they are easier to monologue than dialogue, oblivious to motivations of others while they are speaking, Mrs. Sarcasm. So you see, this is very, very simple to understand. It's like we are talking, there are three of us, and suddenly somebody looks at the watch. Even without that person saying it is late, we can read. Perhaps the next person will say, "Oh, it's time for you to go, no problem." Or maybe perhaps yawn, "Oh, it's been such a long day. Maybe let's move on." Simple, simple gestures. Or if the person comes in late and you say something sarcastic and you say, "You are very early." And he would say, "I am early." So he did not understand that the person was being sarcastic. Now, it seems so light in these examples, but please remember the consequences of this in a college, in a school, in a child who is a young adult, all right, is huge, because friends, all right, they do not understand what this child is going through. I remember one Asperger's in my class. I'm sorry, I'm referring so there will be clarity. And he would talk, and when he spoke, he would say things which are not relevant, only to create jest. Everybody would start laughing at him, not with him, which I ironed out using my own way of showing them, you may make a mistake, I may make a mistake, but definitely both of us do not like to be laughed at, but only laughed with. Now, the question is, how many people actually understand and know this? Now, we are coming to the emotional challenges. Empathy. Now, empathy, I'll give you one example. It, it envisages or shows this whole thing clearly. This particular parent told her child that so and so died. So immediately, this high functioning child turned around and said, "So, what is your problem? She's dead. She's gone. That's it." And the mother at that point of time had not taken her child for any form of diagnosis. So, as we engaged in a conversation and I spoke at length, she began to find out that her child may be on the spectrum. Now, you see, when we show such bluntness, or when the child shows such bluntness, if you are dealing with your peers, there could be a lot of consequences. People will start judging you, will start avoiding you, and they would pass statements like, "I think he's too much into himself. He does not know to be nice. Let's not mix with him." And please remember, that is when the social gap becomes a huge challenge. The child will feel lonely, the child will feel isolated, maybe possibly go through anxiety, and maybe even lock himself in the room. Some of the real life scenarios that I have faced in my 15 years of looking at autism, where a parent actually prompted me to look at her child who did not have any friends, talking to an imaginary friend. So you see, when that happens, straight away, when we go back to my first slide, we are talking about how schizophrenia may come into play here. And based on that identification, medication will be sought. So the temperaments of the child will be affected because they are not understood. They have expectations. And what are their expectations? Expectations imposed by parents, expectations imposed by teachers, which is not wrong. But the question is, how are these expectations imposed? This is the big question mark. So, before we can actually expect the child For example, to sit on a table and eat from the plate. Why do we need to understand autism? Now, in my research, all right, we have so many interventions. Some interventions that maybe I myself may not know about. When I went to NASOM, I used PACS, right? Of course, ever since PACS, the oldest is ABA therapy. And of course, we have many private entities who actually lean on ABA therapy. But the question is this, is, or does only one intervention work well with the child? Beautiful audience, the answer is no. You need a hybrid. What can happen is, as I mentioned earlier, the child in imposing an expectation, you must complete the task. We are not sure how that is extracted from the child. Do you shout? Do you scream? Do you insist? Do you force? Do you physically handle? Do you do it against the child's will? See, these are very, very important terminologies I'm using. Against the child's will. Now, when that happens, the child may go through what we call depression, from depression, anxiety. There's a phobia. He does not want to go to the school. I had one parent, she said, every time she went near the child would do that. And on looking at it a little bit more deeper, she found out the place where she sent, the tendency is for that person to raise the hands. And raising the hands, what followed after that, now in his hippocampus, in his memory, he does not associate that with something positive. Now, another issue is obsessive compulsive disorder. It's a distraction. There's eating. The child eats and eats and eats because, for a simple reason, there is no routine. Now, I use this word comorbid because autism does not only come with autism. Sometimes you have ADD and ADHD. Of course, for many years, the question is it ADD, is it ADHD? There's an interplay of these terminologies. But somewhere in 1994, right, they said it's ADHD, hyperactive disorder, so you can have that. Or sometimes they have epilepsy. So these are the other issues that goes or may go along with that particular predicament of being diagnosed as autistic. What else can happen? Emotional, behavioral problems. Let me just share with you a real example. Okay, this was actually my student, and he had actually posted, and I saw, and I knew he was on the spectrum. And he says, all he said was this, Madam Ruth, people don't understand me. I am not understood. I can't have friends. They misinterpret what I say. I don't understand why this is happening. So I feel suicidal. I feel my life is not worth living, so forth and so on. But perhaps in his earlier life, right, the emphasis would have been on education. So the child would have been taught mathematics and science and so forth, which again, I reiterate, is not wrong. But the gravity, what is it that your child needs? This is what needs to be addressed first. All right, so here we have other issues, and they said research has shown the eating disorders, there's been poor response to treatment, employment, independent living, leaving school, coping with college. What about society? Society is another issue, fitting into a non-autistic world. Now, it has shown that girls have a tendency, all right, they're high functioning, to work a little harder to be accepted. But that does not come with another consequence. It has shown they have mood disorders, anxiety, and culturally, we are so gravitated, or we are so inclined to pharmacological treatments. That means we think for medication, I want to stop the tics, I want to stop the repetitive movements, I'm conscious of what people are saying, people are looking. Now, with all that going on as well, in Malaysia, I'm going to show you in terms of statistics, accessibility of therapies are limited. Understanding is not totally attained. So if we look at the next slide, right? So here, without understanding, we have the risk, as I mentioned earlier, the child being isolated, possibly mental health issues. And please do not forget, what children, they grow, they become teenagers and they become adults. So in my empowering, I am giving power not for today, not for tomorrow, but forever, so that we have the foresight that the child needs to assimilate into society. When they use the word hidden disability, let's look back at Anthony Hopkins, the slide where he discovered he was only on the spectrum when he was 70, because he had islets of ability. Probably behind silent whispers, people would have said, oh, he's a narcissist. Oh, he wants to be in control. 34% of children say the worst thing is being picked on. 63 says they're not in the kind of school that their parents believe they should be in, and they are not getting help. And they told us, okay, that they would require more support to feel less isolated. What about dollars and cents? Here we have something, right, with the statistics where you have 6,000, 19 and above, and 11,000. And in my research, if you look in totality, it could even amount to 35,000. So how are we going to help parents? How are we going to help teachers? Now, the key thing is this. When we talk about autism, please bear in mind this most important thing. It doesn't take one, okay, I'm going to draw an analogy. It doesn't take one ingredient in that dish to make it right, which means it doesn't take one therapist to make it right. You would require what we call collaboration. And when you talk about collaboration, first and most important knowledge empowerment is parents. Parents must know their child. Parents must know the desire. Then, when they visit the teachers, they collaborate with them. When they visit the therapist, they collaborate with them. So there is a unanimous collaboration between parents, teachers, and even society when you actually send them out there to the real world. So this is what I empower. But before you can come up with individualized intervention, please listen to me very carefully. What kind of parent am I? Am I an authoritative? Am I an authoritarian? Am I a permissive parent? Question number one. What do you mean by this? Am I a parent who has been nurtured in such a way that studies are so important? So my child who is on the spectrum, as we have seen earlier, has limitations. But because that is how I have looked at success or interpreted success in life, I would impose that on my child on the spectrum using the expertise as I may be financially able and get therapies all over. So let me share with you a real life example. I had a parent, all right. In fact, the father came to visit me and he told me, Madam Ruth, I've heard about you and I've come to see you for one reason. I have spent 30 to 40,000 Malaysian ringgit, right? And my child does not speak. I thought he could speak when he started using the same word rampantly all the time. But till now, he's already 12 and he doesn't speak. What is going on? So he completed the course, and now both husband and wife, today, initially he had to drag his wife, but now they would land and they would both rush, come for the class. Their relationship has become better, their quality of life has become better. They know what to talk with the therapist, they know what to talk with the teachers. But before we can graduate to that level of managing these beautiful children, we must look at what we are. So that is where you need to know reliability and validity. So you need the laws. And that comes from developmental psychology, whether it's Skinner, whether it's Eric Erickson, because ABA therapy uses a lot of Skinner's principles. So you need to know. Now, the way that it is done with me, I have been lecturing for 33 years. Not that I'm 80, but I started very young in all areas of life. However, I have looked at it in such a way that every person who knocks at my door has a different cognitive ability. They may be doctors, they may be PhD degree holders, or they may be just someone who never got a certificate. At the end of the day, what is the learning outcome? The learning outcome is to understand your child. So the manner in which it is taught is the ability to develop your critical thinking, so that even if you have a piece of paper, you can stop, you can help prevent your meltdown. Even if I'm a fisherman, maybe the child has affinity for a different environment, how to help the child in that predicament. So the mode in which it is explained is, you can pick anything from, you can read anything, you can have anybody coming to talk to you. You will sit back with such confidence, and you will know and you will understand what is it that person is doing, whether they are from England, whether they are from America. Because you see, autism is very complex, but that complexity is reduced to simple understanding, so that when we enter the child's world and we suddenly want to shout or scold, we have empowered our hippocampus, our long-term memory, and immediately hesitate and consciously know what to do right for the child. So with this, I close my last, just a brief slide of how, of course, everyone knows this Einstein and some of the talks that I've done. Thank you very much. I'm open to questions now.
Thank you, Ruth. I felt like I was in a very informative lecture and so much to learn, and you know, it's like so much of knowledge, so much of information. And I really like what you said is that parents, you have to understand your child before trying to fix, before expecting everyone else to actually fix your child. And I also like the part that you talked about partnership, and that's also one of UN Sustainable Goals number 17, actually, partnership for the goals. So you have to work together collectively. Yes, we will take questions now, and
Okay, sure.
yeah. I like to read a comment. It says it's from Sarah Sundram. It says enlightening and informative talk, Ruth. Confronting too. Appreciate the programs available to parents of autistic children. And
Okay.
yeah, and someone said CBD oil for medication, autism treatment. Do you want to comment on that, Ruth?
Sorry, I didn't pick up that word. Sorry, what was that?
Somebody was saying I've
Oh,
lost it.
CBD oil. Okay, CBD
Sonia.
oil. You see,
Yeah.
okay, thank you. Sure, I will. So you see, in terms of oils and medications and all that, there are so many out there which I myself may not know. But what we need to understand is this: when we apply all those things, it is just a relief, but it does not improve that situation. It relieves the child, so perhaps the child is calm, and now we can do the next best step, that is, we use the intervention to enter the child's world. So, because you see, the most important thing is you can't. Many parents come and ask me, "Can I use this? And is it going to cure autism? Is it going to take away the autistic traits?" Which is, if I may say so directly, virtually impossible. It is intervention. And how is it done? Beautifully. It is us identifying the desires of the child, which is then turned into an intervention that would empower the child in different areas. If you want the child to speak, if it's the child is Asperger's, you need social skills, and you don't have to invest so much of money. I will show you how to make the child fit into different challenges that the child faces. So there are many areas that needs to be highlighted here. Any other question, Anne?
I think your presentation was so good. We're just getting all very good comments here. And
Okay,
yeah, Suresh said, I have learned so much more during this 1 hour. Thank you, Ruth.
thank
And
you.
and Ruth, actually, what you just said, it's like it brings back to what you had said earlier, in the sense that you don't want your child to be laughed at, but you want your child to be laughed with. And I think it makes a lot of sense, because like if we totally ignore children's behavior, thinking it falls under the spectrum, or whatever, and in the longer run, when they actually reach to a certain age where it's hard to actually reverse a lot of things, so it's that early intervention which you have been emphasizing a lot, to empower the families who spend a lot of time with their kids, and so that they can help the teachers or the caregivers to actually work in sync, and we can manage a child's behavior in that sense. Yeah, that's a question for you, Ruth.
Well, as early as 3, because that is when the theory of mind develops. Usually, why the age of 3? Because I always believe why. For every answer, you must have proof, evidence. Maybe that's why it took up long. So, the most important thing is, at the age of 3, we have something called pretend play or joint attention, where the child would take a toy, go to the corner, and usually play with a friend. But what you would observe or may observe, the child will play with the toy, but not with another child. The child may play with himself. Does not, when you call the child, he does not respond, does not look at you, and that's when cause for concern comes. Is there something not right? So at the age of 3, that would be the right age to do the diagnosis. Perfect. It is half. Okay, let me just give you in terms of statistics. When you talk about genetics, it's 50%. It has been proven 50%. The rest of the 50%, let me quickly tell you very fast. It could be even the food, the stress levels that we have, and we have something called de novo mutation of genes, which means I do not carry the genes. But because of some stress that I go through, there is a mutation, and when I'm expecting, chances of me having a child may occur. So, another reason, sometimes when you look at a child, you may have OCD, you may have ADD, you may skip a generation, and then the chances of you having an autistic child will also be there. And then they have that whole argument about the pollution of the environment. So it's 50% here and 50% based on the toxicity of the environment as well. Okay, very good question. If you're talking in terms of hereditary, you see, the because of the gravity, because of the average of it being 50-50, you will never know. You will never know till you have a child. because there is no way that, because I had one parent who actually told me there was a doctor who said he was able to detect if the child is autistic while the child is in the stomach. So I said, what is he doing in Old Klang Road? He should be getting a Nobel Prize and not sitting down there. So it is not possible to know if it's hereditary or whether what is the cause. It's only on the birth of the child that these questions arise, because the question will be, why me? Why did it happen to me? Is it my side? Is it your side? I've had parents sit and engage in a battle of wits. Is it me? Is it your side? Is it, all these little arguments? Only then the question of causation will arise. Okay, thank you for the question. Now, late bloomer is a total different cat or fish. It's totally different, because the person is not going through the developmental milestones as targeted. However, when you receive a proper diagnosis of being on the spectrum under a trained psychologist or clinical psychologist, you will see there may be a thin line. So it is very, very important. I always tell parents, it is very, very important to get a diagnosis done, because only on diagnosis can we impose the relevant intervention.
Okay, on that note, for families who are listening, if you want to have a diagnosis done, NASOM Satya Alam provides all these services. We have a psychologist, we have an occupational therapist, and we have a multidisciplinary team there who can assist you and your child, and you can always contact NASOM Satya Alam. And if you want to contact Ruth, you can go to her Facebook page, Ruth, or you can also go to Ruth Training Academy. Am I right, Ruth? Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
the information is there, and yeah, and you can always send us a message, and we will also put Ruth's contact number on the comments page. Is that okay for you, Ruth, if we put your contact number there?
Definitely, definitely. I'm all out to help. Definitely. Please do that. Definitely.
Okay, and I personally know a lot of people who have benefited from Roots training, and one of them is my daughter. Actually, she's undergone Roots training, and she's benefited much. It has actually taught her a lot of things. And with that, our dear audience, I'd like to say thank you very much for spending your Saturday afternoon with us. Thank you so much, Ruth, for this enlightening talk. It has really opened a lot of our eyes, actually, and the way we look at things and the way we have to look at things. It's all in the comments down there. And also to our producer for the show, Julian, and to Nasom, thank you very much. Have a good
Thank you.
evening, everybody. Bye bye.
Thank you.